My daughter, my beautiful Amelia, gestured towards me with a dismissive wave of her hand and told the host of the city's most exclusive charity gala, "Oh, that's just my mother. She's the help." But the host, a woman dripping in diamonds, walked right past my daughter, threw her arms around me in a warm hug, and said, "Catherine, I had no idea your mentor was coming tonight." "Hi, everyone. It is such a comfort to be here with you all again. I'm Grandma Catherine. My name is Catherine Wallace. I'm 70 years old, and I'm from a small town just outside of Hartford, Connecticut, the kind of place that lives in the quiet, wealthy shadow of the big city. This is a story I've kept like a thorn under my skin for the better part of a decade. My other children, my 2 wonderful sons, know that their sister Amelia and I have a complicated relationship. They think it's because she's difficult. They don't know the full story. They don't know that on the proudest night of her life, she tried to sever the very root of her own family tree just to impress a room full of strangers. To tell this story, to finally pull out that thorn, is going to hurt. But some things have to hurt before they can heal. And I am finally ready to heal. Before I begin, I would be so grateful if you would do an old woman a favor and like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support is a constant, gentle reminder that a person's story has value and that telling the truth is always an act of strength. And today, I need all the strength I can get. My story doesn't begin in that glittering, cold ballroom. It begins 30 years earlier, with the smell of lemon polish and the quiet dignity of a job well done. It begins with my husband, Sam. Oh, my Sam. He was a contractor, a man who built beautiful, sturdy things with his own 2 hands. He believed that an honest day's work was a form of prayer. He'd come home, tired to his bones, with sawdust in his hair, and he'd look at the calluses on his hands with a deep, quiet pride. "We're builders, Kathy," he used to say. "We build houses, we build lives, we build a family. There is no more noble work in the world." He was the most honorable man I have ever known. His love was like the houses he built, solid, dependable, and made to last a lifetime. And I was a builder too, in my own way. I wasn't just the help. I was a professional housekeeper, an estate manager really, for some of the wealthiest families in Connecticut. I didn't just clean, I created order. I managed households. I knew how to properly polish silver, how to care for antique wood, how to manage a staff for a dinner party of 50. I took a fierce, quiet pride in my work. It was a skill, a craft. I was the silent, steady engine that made these grand, beautiful houses run like clockwork. We were a team, Sam and I. We worked hard, we saved our money, and we poured all of our love and our values into our daughter, Amelia. And for so many years, she was the most wonderful child. She wasn't ashamed of what we did. She was fascinated by it. She would come with me to the grand houses on Saturdays sometimes. She didn't see it as work. She saw it as an adventure. She called my large ring of client keys my magic wands, the keys that could open any door. She'd watch me, her eyes wide with wonder, as I'd bring a dusty, cluttered room to a state of sparkling, peaceful order. "You're like a fairy godmother, Mommy," she'd say. "You make everything beautiful." She understood. She saw the magic in the work. She saw the pride. She knew that the money her father and I earned with our hard-working hands was the foundation of her safe, happy life. She would draw pictures of our family, her father with a hammer, me with a feather duster, and her in the middle, all of us smiling. The change was a slow, creeping thing. It began when she went away to a prestigious university, a school we had worked double shifts and given up vacations for a decade to afford. She was our dream come true, our ticket to a world of possibilities we had never had. We just never imagined that world would have no room for us. She met a young man there named Gregory. His family wasn't just wealthy, they were a dynasty. They were a name on a building at the university. Their money was old, silent, and effortlessly powerful. Gregory himself was perfectly polite, handsome, and carried with him an air of such profound, generational entitlement that it was like a force field around him. The first time Amelia brought him home, our cozy, comfortable, working-class house seemed to shrink in his presence. He looked around at the furniture Sam had built, at the photos on our mantelpiece, with the polite, detached interest of a tourist visiting a quaint historical village. "It's all very charming, Amelia," he said, his voice a smooth, low murmur. "So wonderfully authentic." Authentic. Kai. The word was a judgment. It meant, not like us. And I watched my daughter, my Amelia, flinch. For the first time in her life, I saw her see our home, our life, through the eyes of a stranger. And I saw the first, tiny, poisonous seed of shame begin to take root. Slowly, Amelia began to change. She was a chameleon, desperately trying to blend into Gregory's world. Her accent softened. She started using bigger, more complicated words. She'd come home for holidays and subtly correct me on which fork to use at dinner. She started referring to my life's work not as my job or my business, but with a vague, dismissive wave of her hand as what Mom does. She began to create a new narrative for herself, a story in which she was the brilliant, self-made star, and her hardworking parents were a piece of her quaint, slightly embarrassing backstory that was best left in the footnotes. My Sam, bless his heart, saw it happening. "She's building a new house for herself, Kathy," he said to me one night, his voice heavy with a sadness that mirrored my own. "And she's forgetting the foundation we laid for her." But I made excuses. She was young. She was in love. She was trying to fit in. I told myself it was a phase, that she would come back to us once she was more secure in herself. I couldn't bear to believe that the daughter who had called me her fairy godmother was now beginning to see me as the scullery maid. When they announced their engagement, I was torn between a mother's joy and a woman's deep, chilling dread. The wedding was to be a grand affair, funded entirely by Gregory's family. It was to be the society event of the year. And I, the mother of the bride, was a problem to be managed. Amelia's future mother-in-law, a woman named Beatrice, who was as cold and elegant as a marble statue, took me to lunch to discuss the wedding. It was not a discussion. It was a list of instructions. She made it very clear, in the most polite, cutting way possible, that my role was to be minimal. I was not to be involved in the planning. I was given a dress to wear, a simple, beige, mother-of-the-bride uniform designed to make me fade into the wallpaper. "We just want a cohesive, elegant look for the family photos, Catherine," Beatrice had said, her smile never reaching her eyes. I swallowed my pride. I bit my tongue. I did it for Amelia. I told myself that my daughter's happiness was more important than my own feelings. I just had to endure this one long, difficult day, and then everything would be fine. The true depths of my daughter's shame, however, were revealed to me the week before the wedding. She came to visit me alone, a rare occurrence. She was nervous, wringing her hands. "Mother," she began, and the formal word was a warning. She only called me Mother when she was about to deliver bad news. "We need to talk about the gala." The gala was the pre-wedding charity event, hosted by one of Gregory's family's oldest friends, a woman named Isabella Rossi, a legendary philanthropist I had only ever read about in the society pages. "What about it, darling?" I asked. It's going to be a very high-profile evening," Amelia said, refusing to meet my eyes. "All of Gregory's father's business partners will be there. It's very important for his career, and I want to make sure the evening goes smoothly, without any awkwardness." A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. I knew what was coming. "And what kind of awkwardness are you expecting?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. She finally looked at me, her face a mask of pleading misery. "Mother, people will ask you what you do. And it's a difficult thing to explain. It could reflect poorly on me, on Gregory. It was my job. My life's work, the source of my pride. And to my own daughter, it was a social liability. So what do you suggest I do, Amelia?" I asked, my heart breaking. "Should I lie?" "No," she said too quickly. Of course not. I just thought maybe it would be easier. If anyone asks, you could just say you're a household manager, or better yet, just say you're retired. It's simpler. It avoids any follow-up questions. She wanted me to lie. She wanted me to erase the truth of my life, the truth of her own upbringing, with a simple, clean, socially acceptable lie. She wanted me to be ashamed of the very work that had paid for the education that allowed her to be in that room in the first place. I should have said no. I should have stood up for myself right then and there. But I looked at my daughter's desperate, unhappy face, and I saw a young woman so terrified of not measuring up, so drowning in the shark-infested waters of her new life, that she was willing to use her own mother as a stepping stone. And my heart, my foolish mother's heart, broke for her. "All right, Amelia," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "It's what you need me to do." The relief on her face was so profound. It was like a final twisting turn of the knife. She thought she had managed the problem. She thought I had agreed to be her accomplice in her own great lie. She had no idea that her simple, cruel request had just awakened a part of me that had been dormant for 30 years. The quiet, professional, and deeply proud housekeeper who did not, under any circumstances, suffer fools. The week leading up to the gala was a masterclass in quiet cruelty. Amelia and her future mother-in-law, Beatrice, descended upon my life with the precision of a military campaign. The beige dress was delivered in a long, elegant box. It was a perfectly nice dress, I suppose, but wearing it felt like putting on a costume of my own erasure. It was the color of invisibility. Amelia called me every day, not to connect, but to coach. Her voice was a tight wire of anxiety. "Now, Mother, when you meet Gregory's colleagues, a simple smile and a nod is best. No need to get drawn into any long conversations. Remember, if anyone asks what you did before you retired, just say you were in domestic management. It's vague, it's elegant. And please, for heaven's sake, don't wear that old locket with Dad's picture in it. It's a little sentimental for this kind of event. The pearls I sent will be much more appropriate." Each instruction was a small death. She was stripping me of my stories, my memories, my very identity, piece by piece, until I was nothing more than a generic smiling, beige-clad mother who wouldn't cause any awkwardness. She wasn't just ashamed of my entire life. She was ashamed of my entire life. She was ashamed of her father's memory, of our love, of the very woman who had raised her. A cold, hard anger, an emotion I had suppressed for years for her sake, began to solidify in my heart. It wasn't a hot, flashing rage. It was the cold, quiet, and deeply powerful anger of a woman who had finally reached her limit. I didn't argue with her on the phone. I just said, "Of course, darling. Whatever you think is best." I let her believe she was in control. I let her believe I was a willing participant in my own diminishment. The night of the gala arrived. I looked at the beige dress hanging on my closet door. It looked like a ghost. I took it down, folded it, and put it back in its box. Then I opened the other side of my closet and took out my own dress. It was a simple, impeccably tailored black dress of the highest quality, a dress I had bought myself years ago. It was the dress I wore when I was consulting for my most important clients. It was not the dress of a retiring wallflower. It was the uniform of a woman who ran the world from behind the scenes. I did not wear the pearls she sent. I wore my locket. My Sam would be with me tonight. When the car she sent for me arrived, I felt a strange sense of calm. I was no longer a mother going to her daughter's party. I was a professional walking into a job site. And the job tonight was to observe the full extent of the mess my daughter had made of her own soul. The gala was held at the city's grandest museum. The main hall was a breathtaking sea of black ties and jewel-toned gowns. The air hummed with the quiet, confident murmur of old money and power. I saw Amelia across the room, standing beside Gregory and his parents. She was a vision in a shimmering silver gown, laughing and holding a champagne flute, the perfect princess in her perfect fairy tale. She saw me enter, and for a fraction of a second, a flicker of panic crossed her face. I wasn't in the beige dress. I was not the subdued, manageable mother she had ordered. I was myself. She quickly excused herself and rushed over to me, her smile stretched tight as a drum. "Mother," she hissed, her fingers gripping my arm with surprising force. "What are you wearing? Where's the dress Beatrice and I picked out for you?" "It didn't feel like me, dear," I said calmly, gently removing her hand from my arm. "Don't worry, I won't embarrass you." "You're already embarrassing me," she whispered, her eyes darting around the room to see who was watching. "And is that Dad's locket? I told you not to wear that." "Your father is the reason I am here, Amelia," I said, my voice as quiet and cold as her own. "He is the reason you are here. He deserves to be here tonight, even if it's just in a picture." "Nicht shoes." She looked at me, her face a mixture of fury and fear. She knew, in that moment, that she had lost control of me. The puppet had cut her own strings. For the next hour, she shadowed me relentlessly. If I paused to look at a painting, she was there, steering me away. If an acquaintance of mine from a charity committee approached to say hello, Amelia would answer for me, keeping the conversation brief and superficial before pulling me away. She was a sheepdog, and I was the rogue sheep she was desperately trying to keep from wandering into the prized flock. Her desperation was pathetic, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of pity for her. She was so terrified of her own roots, so ashamed of the good, honest stock she came from, that she had to live every moment in a state of high alert, constantly managing the narrative of her own life. What an exhausting way to live. The moment of truth arrived in the form of the hostess herself, Isabella Rossi. Isabella was a legend in the city. She was the matriarch of an old, immensely wealthy Italian family, a woman known for her style, her philanthropy, and her sharp, no-nonsense intelligence. She moved through the room like a queen, and when she approached our little group, the air around us seemed to crackle with importance. Amelia's back went ramrod straight. Beatrice, her mother-in-law, put on a smile of dazzling, reptilian charm. Gregory stood a little taller. This was the moment they had been waiting for. An audience with royalty. "Beatrice, Gregory, so wonderful to see you," Isabella said, her voice a warm, husky contralto. She turned her brilliant, intelligent eyes to my daughter. "And you must be the lovely Amelia. I have heard so much about you. Your wedding is the talk of the town." "Oh no." Amelia blushed, a picture of perfect, blushing bride-to-be. "Mrs. Rossi, it is an absolute honor to meet you," she gushed. "We are so thrilled to be here. Your work on the museum board is simply legendary." They exchanged a few more pleasantries. I stood by, silent and invisible, just as my daughter had wished. I hadn't seen Isabella in person in almost 5 years, but she looked exactly the same, radiant, powerful, and in complete command of her world. And then, Isabella's gaze fell on me. Her eyes, which had been polite and socially gracious, suddenly widened. A look of pure, unadulterated shock, followed by a radiant, genuine smile, transformed her face. It was a smile of such warmth and affection. It was like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. "Catherine," she said, her voice full of a disbelief and a delight that was utterly real. Before I could even reply, Amelia, in a blind panic, made the move that would detonate her entire life. She saw Isabella looking at me, and her deepest, most terrifying fear was realized. An important person was about to engage her embarrassing mother in conversation. She had to shut it down. She had to put me in my place, to define me before I could define myself. She gave a little, dismissive, tinkling laugh. She put a hand on Isabella's arm, a gesture that was both familiar and condescending. And then she said the words she had been practicing, the words that would sever me from her world once and for all. "Oh," Amelia said, with a wave of her hand in my direction. "Don't worry about her. That's just my mother. She's the help." The words dropped into the small, quiet space between us, like stones into a perfectly still pond. The ripples of their cruelty were instantaneous and devastating. She hadn't just said I was retired. She hadn't just said I was in domestic management. She had demoted me from her mother to her employee, a nameless, faceless servant. The help, it was the most profound, most soul-crushing rejection a child could deliver. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just stood there, my back straight, my head held high, and I looked at my daughter. I looked at this beautiful, cruel stranger she had become, and I felt the last, stubborn, foolish vestiges of a mother's love for the child she used to be finally, blessedly die. Beatrice and Gregory looked horrified, not because of the cruelty, but because of the social clumsiness. You didn't dismiss anyone so crudely in their world. It was unelegant. But Isabella Rossi. Isabella was not horrified. She was not confused. A slow, dangerous, and utterly magnificent smile spread across her face. She had understood everything in that one brutal sentence. She did something that no one in that room could have ever predicted. She completely ignored my daughter. She walked right past Amelia, right past the future in-laws, right past Gregory. She walked straight to me. The woman her host had just been told was the help. She took both of my hands in her own, her diamonds cool against my skin. She leaned in and kissed me on both cheeks, a gesture of warm European affection. And then she turned back to my stunned, speechless daughter, her arm now linked firmly through mine. Her voice, when she spoke, was no longer warm. It was as cold and sharp as a diamond. "Amelia," Isabella Rossi said, her gaze unwavering. "Your mother, Catherine, is one of the most remarkable women I have ever known. She is the reason I know how to run my homes, how to manage my staff, and how to host an event like this. She taught me everything. You didn't tell me your mentor was coming tonight." The word mentor landed in the middle of that glittering circle of people with the force of a thunderclap. The silence that followed was absolute, a perfect crystalline vacuum in which my daughter's casual cruelty and Isabella Rossi's powerful correction echoed and re-echoed. Amelia froze. The pretty, condescending smile was wiped from her face, as if by a physical blow. Her face, which had been flushed with social triumph, went a ghastly, mottled white. She stared at Isabella, then at me, her eyes wide with a dawning, panicked horror. Her brain, I could see, was desperately trying to compute this impossible new reality. Her mother, the simple, embarrassing, working-class woman she had just dismissed as the help, was the mentor to Isabella Rossi, the undisputed queen of their social universe? It did not make sense. It was a tear in the very fabric of the world she had worked so hard to inhabit. Gregory and his mother, Beatrice, were equally stunned. Their faces were a comical mask of shock. They looked from Isabella to me and back again, their polite social smiles frozen in place, their eyes trying to solve a puzzle that was far beyond their comprehension. They had vetted Amelia's family. They knew her father was a contractor and her mother was a housekeeper. The word mentor, especially from the lips of a woman like Isabella, was a piece of data that their entire social algorithm could not process. Isabella, bless her magnificent, strategic heart, was not finished. She kept her arm linked through mine, a gesture of public, unshakable solidarity. She turned her cool, assessing gaze upon Beatrice. "Beatrice, darling," she said, her voice dripping with a false, sweet sympathy. "You look shocked. Surely Amelia told you about her mother's history. Catherine Wallace isn't just Guy housekeeper. She is eine die housekeeper. For 30 years, she was the most sought-after estate manager in New England. She managed the Davenport estate. She ran the governor's summer home in Newport. She consulted for families in New York and Palm Beach. My dear, your daughter's mother taught an entire generation of women like us how to live in our own homes. To get an hour of Catherine's time was like getting an audience with the Pope. I consider it one of the great privileges of my life that she took me on as a young bride and taught me everything." Every word was a perfectly polished stone, and she was building a fortress around me and a prison around my daughter. She wasn't just correcting the record. She was rewriting the entire book. She was taking my humble, hard-working life, the one my daughter was so ashamed of, and she was reframing it. She was painting me not as a servant, but as a master, a quiet, behind-the-scenes titan, a legend. And then she turned that brilliant, cutting gaze back to my daughter. "So, Amelia," she said, her voice now dangerously soft, "tell me, why would you introduce a legend, a woman to whom I, and so many others in this room, owe a great debt, as the help? It's a very curious choice of words for your own mother." This was my fight back. And the most beautiful part of it was, I didn't have to say a single word. I had spent a lifetime making other people shine, of working silently in the background to ensure their lives ran smoothly. And now, the most powerful woman in the room was doing it for me. She was taking my 30 years of quiet, invisible work, and she was holding it up to the light for everyone to see. And it was blinding. Amelia opened her mouth. A small, pathetic, squeaking sound came out. She looked at Gregory, her eyes screaming for him to save her. But Gregory was staring at me with a completely new expression on his face. An expression of shock, yes, but also a flicker of something else. Calculation. A dawning respect. His fiancée's embarrassing mother had just been revealed as a secret asset, a hidden key to the world he so desperately wanted to conquer. Amelia was alone. Completely and utterly alone, trapped in the wreckage of her own lie. It was a joke, she finally stammered, the words tumbling out in a desperate, unconvincing heap. Just a silly, affectionate joke. Between my mother and me? She tried to laugh, a high, brittle, terrible sound. Isabella Rossi did not laugh. She just raised a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow. The gesture was more devastating than any shout. It said, simply, "I do not believe you. And now, no one else here does either." Darling, Niwing. The story I knew would be all over the city by morning. Not the story of Amelia's brilliant engagement, but the story of the night she publicly tried to disown her own remarkable mother, and was publicly corrected by Isabella Rossi. Her social climbing had ended in a spectacular, fatal fall. Isabella, her work done, gave my hand a final firm squeeze. "Catherine," she said, her voice warm again, and loud enough for everyone to hear. "You are not to spend another moment with these children. You are coming with me. You will sit at my table. There are a dozen people here who will be thrilled to see you." And with that, she led me away. She swept me from the scene of the crime, leaving my daughter and her new family standing in a circle of stunned, awkward silence. As we walked across the ballroom floor, I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me. But for the first time in my life, I did not feel like an invisible servant. I felt seen. I felt powerful. I felt like myself. The rest of the evening was a surreal dream. I sat at Isabella's table, the guest of honor. Old clients, powerful men and women I had not seen in years, came up to greet me, to shake my hand, to tell me they had never forgotten what I had taught them. I was no longer Catherine, the housekeeper. I was Catherine Wallace, the legend. I told stories of my life, my real stories, and they listened, not with condescension, but with respect. I did not see Amelia for the rest of the night. She and Gregory and his family, I was told later, made a quiet, hasty exit. The fairy tale was over. My fight back wasn't a plan I had orchestrated. It was a truth I had lived. For 30 years, I had done my job with integrity, with pride, and with a quiet excellence. I had built a reputation, a legacy, not of money or fame, but of skill and respect. And in the end, it was that legacy, that quiet, invisible work, that had saved me. My daughter had tried to use my humble profession as a weapon to humiliate me, but she had no idea that my profession was also my shield and my sword. I came home that night to my quiet, empty house. I took off the black dress and I hung it carefully in the closet. I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw the wrinkles, the gray in my hair, but I also saw a woman I hadn't seen in a very long time. A woman who was not just a mother, not just a widow, not just the help, a woman who had a story of her own, a story of value. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would never ever allow anyone to diminish that story again. The aftermath of that night at the gala was not a loud explosion, but a quiet seismic shift that reordered my entire family's landscape. The story, just as I'd known it would, rippled through their social circle with the speed of light. Amelia had committed the one unforgivable sin in their world. She had been publicly exposed as inelegant. She had shown a lack of grace, a lack of breeding, and a shocking lack of strategic intelligence. Her engagement to Gregory did not officially end for another month, but in truth, it died that night in the museum ballroom. His family, the dynasty, could not abide a future daughter-in-law who had created such a public spectacle of her own insecurity. She was no longer a beautiful asset. She was a damaged good, a walking symbol of social miscalculation. I heard through the grapevine that they were postponing the wedding, the universal code for a quiet, face-saving cancellation. My sons, Amelia's brothers, called me the next day. They were utterly bewildered, caught between the story they'd always known and the legend I'd heard the night before. "Mom," my oldest said, his voice a mixture of awe and confusion. "Is it true? What Isabella Rossi said? The Davenports? The governor?" "Yes, dear," I said quietly. "It's all true. I never thought it was important to talk about. It was just my job." "Your job?" he said, and I could hear a new note of profound respect in his voice. "Mom, you weren't a housekeeper. You were a CEO. You were running empires." And in his words, I felt a piece of myself that had been lost for years finally click back into place. Amelia herself did not call me. She couldn't. What could she say? A week later, a small, stiff, formal card arrived in the mail. It was an apology. Or rather, it was the ghost of an apology. "I am sorry if my words caused you any embarrassment," it read. It was signed simply, Amelia. Add that little word. It told me everything. She wasn't sorry for the cruelty, for the shame she had tried to heap upon me. She was only sorry that it had backfired so spectacularly. She was sorry she had been caught. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. The bond between us, the one that had been fraying for years, had finally, irrevocably, snapped. You cannot rebuild a bridge that has been deliberately burned to the ground. She moved away from the city not long after that, away from the scene of her social demise. I hear from my sons that she is finding her way. I hope she is. I hope one day she learns that her own worth is not something to be borrowed from a wealthy husband or a prestigious address, but something to be built with her own two hands, just as her father and I had done. And me? That night at the gala reawakened a part of me I thought was long gone. The quiet, professional, and deeply competent woman who knew her own value. I started my own consulting business. The legend of Catherine Wallace, it turned out, only grew in my absence. Old clients, and the children of old clients, started calling. They didn't want me to clean their houses. They wanted my advice, my expertise, my story. I now travel. I give lectures. I teach a new generation of estate managers how to create a world of elegance and order. But the first lesson I always teach them is the one I learned the hard way. I tell them that the most important house you will ever manage is your own. The most important asset you will ever have is your own self-respect. And you must never, ever allow anyone to treat it as cheap. The lesson I learned from this painful chapter is a profound one. For years, I had defined myself by my relationships. I was Sam's wife. I was Amelia's mother. I had poured so much of myself into those roles that I had forgotten who Catherine was. My daughter's cruel attempt to erase me had the opposite effect. It forced me to find myself again. It forced me to stand on the foundation of my own life's work and to realize, with a shock, just how solid it was. Your work, whatever it may be, whether you are building houses or cleaning them, whether you are a CEO or a secretary, has a dignity that is all its own. It is the story you write with your own hands every single day. And you must never, ever be ashamed of that story. You must never let anyone else's definition of success diminish the value of your own. So, if you are out there and you are feeling diminished, If you are being made to feel that your story is not important enough, please listen to this old woman. You are not the help in anyone else's life. You are the mentor, the legend, the hero of your own. You just have to stand up, walk to the microphone, and tell your own truth. You might be surprised at just how many people are waiting to listen. Thank you so much for letting me tell my story today. It feels wonderful to finally give it the elegant ending it deserved. If you found a piece of your own story in mine, I would be so honored if you would like this video and subscribe to our channel. And please, be sure to ring that notification bell so we don't miss our next chat. The comments below are a place for all of us to share our own expertise. So please, if you feel so moved, share a story about the pride you take in your own work. Love you all. This is Grandma Catherine, and I'll see you in the next story.